Mr. Hitchens, you're up first. Thank you for coming.
Nice of you to have me, and nice of you, ladies and gentlemen, to come, and nice for Californians to lay on a day that reminds me of my English boyhood, and nice too to be in the town, the research institute of which not long ago certified Uri Geller as an authorized practitioner of the paranormal. For all the reputation of Stanford for scientific scrupulousness, there's always a little black hole through which things can, and often I notice do, creep. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ben. Incredibly generous and undeserved, if rather terse and ungenerous introduction. I remember thinking, I should say this by way of reply, that when we first met on the set of what was then the primitive version of Politically Incorrect, imagine what the primitive version looked like, ladies and gentlemen. I remember thinking, he's a nice guy, but he needs to live at least 2 more lifetimes just to live down his work for Richard Nixon. And, of course, for all that I wish this for him, I couldn't quite picture 2 more lifetimes for him, or I better share this with you now, even 1 more lifetime for anyone else. Now you know roughly where I'm coming from. Now, I've shared that with you. Now, to the purpose, I'm not at all in search of consensus today. In fact, very much to the contrary. And I can't imagine how I'm going to be able to use up 14 minutes in demolishing intelligent design, as I decline to call it, since it's a propaganda term for creationism. But I'll see if I can waste 14 minutes on it by saying that for consensus terms, we may begin by agreeing that we are in fact here present, that we are present here as actual rational, or at any rate partially rational primates, that we are on a real planet and we are in a verifiable solar system. Let's not congratulate ourselves too much on this, but it is an achievement of a kind, and it is something we have in common. We can also agree, I think, the chances of this coincidence, or I'd better say really contingency, are fairly remote. They have this, of course, in common with other much less rare contingencies. Any of us here today are much luckier in the aggregate than would have been any comparably randomly selected group of people born 500 years ago, whose life expectancy would have been perhaps 30, and whose infant mortality rate would have been something ghastly to behold. Or if we were born in today's Congo or Darfur. However, from the observation of exactly precisely the same facts and the same phenomena and the same processes, it's always been possible to draw 2 kinds of conclusion, and it always will be possible to draw 2 kinds of conclusion. The first is to say that no great decider exists. There isn't a decider who awarded me the right to live while another baby 2 miles or 2,000 miles away barely lived long enough to cry before dying of diarrhea. I don't credit or blame God for these things occurring. That earthquakes and tycoons probably occur. That's what's called by some a Freudian slit. That earthquakes and hurricanes and typhoons and so forth occur not because of the will of divine punishment or divine judgment or divine verdict, but because we live on a climatically volatile planet with a cooling crust which has quite deep faults in some parts of it, including locally. That would be a better explanation, but it doesn't convince everybody. The laws of nature are never suspended. Albert Einstein said that's the miraculous, the only miraculous thing about them, that they never change, that they're completely regular. And they certainly are not suspended in response to prayer or in response to ritual sacrifices, and so forth. The positions I've just given you are my own positions, my own views. I didn't think them up all by myself, but I agree with them. Against it, you can always take the view that we are here as the result of a plan, that we are the object of a divine design, that somebody cares about us, and that this plan seems to imply an author or a designer. These same differences in approach have more recently begun to reflect themselves in the fields of biology and physics, but they are the same as they always were. Now, the supporters of creationism, and I recommend the reading of Judge John Jones's verdict. Google Judge John Jones and Dover, Pennsylvania, if you want to understand why I say creationism not intelligent design, his ruling in the Pennsylvania court case on this. The supporters of this creationist movement have to be able to do 4 things to you tonight. Watch and see if they can. They must show first that the cosmos itself can be interpreted in the light of a design, or fine-tuning, as it's sometimes called. They must show second that our own planet's hospitality to life is not an accident, not a contingency, and thus might be serving a purpose larger than itself. These 2 gigantic attainments, if available to them, would only get them as far as the implication of an author or a designer. That's what used to be called the deistic position. To get to the position that they really want to occupy, that is their concealed agenda, if you will, their surreptitious wish, the theistic wish, they'd have to be able to show that this deity was not just a creator or designer, but took an interest in human affairs, wanted to regulate the morality of his creatures, would be responsive to appeals from them, deciding on the matter of rewards and punishments, would care whether you ate pork, would care whether you snipped the end of your dick or your daughter's clitoris, would care what day you took as holy, would care what propitiations you made to him or her. Now that is the end result, and don't lose sight of it. And the stages of initial proof, hard as they are the ones you have to watch out for in the meantime. Now, our vast new knowledge isn't all that decisive in resolving this ancient dispute, but it can be of help. I asked Francis Collins, the leading Christian who did the Genome Project, as you probably know, how long he thought humanity had been on the Earth, and I asked Professor Richard Dawkins how long he thought fully evolved humans had been present. Dawkins thinks it could have been as many as 250,000 years. Collins thinks certainly not less than 100,000. 100,000 is all I need. 100,000 years since we definitely separated ourselves from the Cro-Magnons and the Neanderthals. I'm exempting from this those of you who may have been to the new Creation Science Museum in Ohio, where you can see animatronic children playing with animatronic dinosaurs in the same park at the same time. And I'm assuming that I can exempt you from that too, sir. But be aware of what some of the implications of this are. Now, that's to say, if you believe in a divine intervention in our lives, that give it just 100,000 years, for the first 94, 95,000, people are born, they die mainly of their teeth or in childbirth or of microorganisms they don't know exist. Their life expectancy is, for the first 50 or 60,000 years, perhaps 25 years. They're killed by animals, they're killed by each other in pointless turf wars, they're killed in typhoons, floods, mudslides, and so forth. But gradually, they make slow, exponential progress. They get to the point of suffering all the time, and heaven watches it with folded arms, like this. And then 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, heaven decides we can't let them go on like this. We need an intervention. Probably the best place for it would be in Bronze Age Palestine or Egypt. Probably the best form it could take would be a human sacrifice. That might cheer them up a bit. Now, if you don't believe this, you do not believe in any of the 3 monotheistic revelations. That's what you have to believe. That's the minimum you must believe in order to believe in any of those aforesaid. And of course, it's not believable, or, shall I put it like this, it only replaces the argument as before. It replaces the argument as it was before we knew about Cro-Magnons, or dinosaurs, or Neanderthals. It argues from design. And if everything was designed, what are we to make of the designer, who sentenced so many generations to barbarism, misery, ignorance, slavery, and early death? In the first place, isn't that rather an incompetent, rather tinkering designer, to say the very least of it? In the second place, isn't it a rather cruel, or at the very best, a highly indifferent one? And we still can't be sure whether this same incompetent and indifferent and cruel person cares whether we go to bed with members of our own gender or not, because there's no way to derive verdicts like this from evidence like that. So the religious still haven't scored the ghost of a point. And that's only to comment on what we know about the last 100,000 or 250,000 years of our own lives. Less than a millisecond of evolutionary or cosmic time. Any study of the process by which it occurred, and we're not, I hope, going to hear that it did not, has to impress us with 2 further facts that are facts verifiable, findings verifiable. The first, 98% of every species that ever appeared on this earth has by now also disappeared from it, become extinct. The second is how very nearly we as a species joined that list. Look up, if you will, the scientist at the National Geographic who now makes it possible for you to look up your own genome, sequence it all the way back to Africa, find out what your ancestry and ethnic parentage is, avoiding the stupid concepts of race that have oppressed us for so long. According to him, by the time we decided to abandon the environment for which our bodies are still adapted, the African savanna, it's very probable, due to volcanic eruptions blotting out of the sunshine by particulate matter and other terrible occurrences, that we were as a tribe down to less than a few thousand individuals before deciding we better get out of this place. We better move on up and out where it's cooler. It's only a very, very contingent matter that we made it this far. And we did not make it because we were helped. We did it by our own unaided effort, if I can put it like that. And our organs, as you can see, when you examine the appendix, the jawline, the coat of fur that you grow and shed in the womb when you're 3 months old, still adapted, annoyingly for us, as are your knee joints and many other things, to the African savanna that we had the good sense in time to abandon. Now, that's not the worst of it. You've got to now think what's going to happen to the cosmos and our place in it. I've got 2 minutes. I'll make the best use of them I can. In the observable universe, there are 400 billion galaxies. Anyone claiming to know enough about this profusion to infer a plan from it had better be very well informed, and I congratulate anyone who tries. When I say observable, I mean something else that's also contingent. Edwin Hubble a few decades ago made the discovery those galaxies are moving away from each other at a very rapid rate that leaves red light behind it. I don't think anyone any longer denies it. Most scientists thought, operating on usual gravitational principles, that that rate would have to slow down by now. They'd be expanding, yes, but the rate would be slowing. No, it's not. It's expanding. The rate is going up. It's getting faster. It's getting close to doubling. That's only 10 years ago we found that out. That means that galaxies are going to be pulled apart faster than light and going to cause them to drop out of view. That means that the reference points for measuring expansion will go, and we'll dilute everything we found out about the Big Bang to nothingness. In fact, to put it as the great physicist Lawrence Krauss has put it, it will erase all the signs that the Big Bang ever occurred. In other words, those who say to you, how is there something instead of nothing, have got to explain to you how well designed it is, how predetermined it is, that very soon in physical time there will be a great deal of nothingness where once there was something. And that this is part of the plan. That the plan is for nothingness. And in local news, more local news, the Andromeda Galaxy is headed our way directly, collision course. Much more local news, just our little suburb of the universe. And it will hit us in 5 billion years, which is to say, in real time, tomorrow. In real time, that's very soon. And that's part of the design. Whose design? What kind of designer? What kind of caprice? What kind of incompetence? What kind of cruelty? What kind of nihilism? What kind of commitment to nothingness? And in the meantime, in the little suburb where we dwell, every other rock in our solar system is inhospitable to life as being too hot or too cold, as is large tract too hot, too cold of our own planet, which is on a climatic and ecological knife edge, as we have good and better and more recent reason to know, and that it is as likely that we'll be able to get out of the way of this and move elsewhere in response to the climate crisis as it is in response to the Andromeda crisis, and that those who try and teach you differently are asking you not to use your intellectual or analytical capacities at all, but to do something very old, very backward, like the Aztecs, like the pre-Galileo, stupefied human beings who didn't know the microorganisms were there, who didn't know about the Big Bang, who didn't know about the red light, and simply to place everything you have on a leap of faith. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, don't do it. You know better. Everybody now knows better. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Christopher?
But the more we know, the more it replaces the question. I mean, there were forms of quasi-life, so pre-bacterial, pre-microbial, went off an extraordinarily long period of time. They don't appear to have been exactly conscious, but nor precisely inert either. Microscopically evolved into later forms. It goes on in this pointless, rather horrible, rather boring way for a very, very, very long time. The point is, what designer wants to make it come out like that? Meanwhile, as life gradually takes hold, 98% of its forms are obliterated without pity. If it wasn't for us knowing about them, they would never have existed. They only exist because we know about them. They didn't otherwise ever exist at all. And if we go, which we might, they won't have existed any more than we did. Now, who wants to make it come about like that? Take the project of eternal life, which I'm glad to find is nothing to do with any other concept of eternity that we could possibly give a name to. It's God's target, apparently, that we all attain this. Because I'm now talking to someone who has openly said that they are a believing Christian. Well, now, I've often wanted to know, if that's what he wants us to have, why do we have to go through this horrible interlude where the odds are stacked against us? What's the point of what used to be about 20 years of miserable life where it's almost impossible to avoid committing a mortal sin, to now, thanks to mainly to our efforts, okay, you've got 80 years where the odds are stacked against you. You're born sick, you're created ill in a hostile environment and commanded to be well. And if you can pass certain tests with the odds stacked against you, then you'll get eternal life. What is this? What designer does this kind of thing? Wants it, thinks it's fun to behave this way, thinks there's any justice or point in any of that? What is this really? But here's another insult for you. But the rantings of frightened children trying to make sense of things they don't understand, and terrified of a dictator who they're willing to appease and propitiate by everything from human sacrifice to the murder of their own children. This is not good for us morally. It's not good for us ethically. It makes no sense intellectually. It makes no sense scientifically either.
Well, with all due respect, I don't think you answered the question. But
what was the question again?
No, Christopher, is it your belief that scientists believe that organic matter has existed as long as inorganic matter?
Look, the devout lady who asked this question, who emailed this in, said, until recently didn't know that any of these phenomena had ever existed. If you told her 100 years ago that everything was specially created by God, she'd have believed that too, or that the fossils were put in the rocks by God to test our faith. She'd have believed that just as well. Now that she knows better, she says, all that proves is that God was more ingenious than we thought. Just as those who used to deny the Big Bang or the evidence of physics, now persuaded of it or unable to refute it, say, oh well, all it shows is the designer was cleverer than we thought. This is an argument that fails for a very famous reason. The reason put forward by Professor Karl Popper. It is unfalsifiable. And unfalsifiability, as every trained mind knows, is the test not of the strength of an argument, but of its weakness. This argument cannot be defeated. It cannot be overthrown. It reverse engineers every discovery we make and says, oh, that simply proves God is smarter than we ever thought. So these are the same people.
Who are
the same
these
people who would have said that the fossils were put in the rocks to test our faith.
So then, Christopher, so your answer is...
So I don't really accept the grammar of their questioning.
So you
just a point of clarification.
We have a debate where you just say, I don't accept the question.
I don't accept the grammar of the question. Someone who doesn't actually believe in science at all, who's been reluctantly persuaded.
Well, how do you know this woman doesn't know?
Because she emails that question wherever I go. She's followed me all over the place.
So you think you're being followed?
I know it only too well. The Pope now says, oh, well, yeah, maybe the Big Bang shows that God was smarter than we thought. It's all knickers, isn't it, to argue like that?
So
it means that nothing one can possibly say can count as an argument, because all of it only proves the ingenuity of the designer in the first place. And this comes from people who used to believe that special creation occurred, that the human eye couldn't possibly have been done except at one go. The only thing that can't have happened was the only thing they could be induced to believe. When they're told, actually, there are 40 different species of eye, separately evolved, and that the only way it can have come is by evolution, they say, oh, come to think of it, that shows how smart God is. This doesn't meet the definition of a good question or a good argument at all. It's not even good propaganda.
So you're just grading the question as a failing question?
Yeah, and that one doesn't pass.
Okay. How about this one?
We have 2 minutes.
Have scientists ever observed a distinct species evolve as distinct from changes within a species?
Is that mine?
JM.
I could object to the grammar of the question and join you, I suppose, because the problem is that it's a question of what the definition of a species is. The Galapagos finches, for instance, it's often defined in terms of being able to reproduce among your kind. But of course, you're separately isolated. It's difficult to verify that question. And so what exactly is a species, and whether or not one species has evolved into another, I don't think it's a crucial or important question in the debate we have here this evening. I think it's quite possible that one species could evolve into another. I do think that most of the very good evidence for the power of natural selection falls under the survival of the fittest rather than the arrival of the fittest. So it's questions like variations in the thickness of finch beaks in the Galapagos Islands based upon variations in the climate, so that seeds change their properties. But you have a cyclical variation. You don't have the origination of some fundamentally different kinds of organisms or organelles. And so I think that natural selection, in principle, has the explanatory power to explain some of these minor things. I am unpersuaded that it has the power to explain all of the adaptive complexity in biology, and I think we're discovering with increasing frequency structures that are inaccessible to the Darwinian mechanism and that suggest foresight.
Christopher?
Well, when the ridiculous figure of Governor Michael Huckabee said he didn't believe in the theory of evolution, he said he didn't believe that he himself was descended from a monkey. Now, that means he doesn't even know what the theory of evolution is. He disbelieves in something he doesn't know about. If we were descended from monkeys, we might look a bit more like Governor Huckabee, I sometimes think. The theory is this, that we have common ancestors, that, yes, we can very, very definitely, by studying the human genome, we can very definitely show the emergence and existence of a new species, our own. No longer are there any Cro-Magnons or Neanderthals to rival us. Yes, it's very plain, written all over us, what Darwin calls the lowly stamp of our origin, that we and they have a common primate and mammalian ancestor, but we, Homo sapiens, are now a new species on the planet. That's indubitable, undeniable, sometimes, I think, rather unattractive, but it answers the question, the grammar of which was very well phrased.
I'd like to thank you very much, Christopher. You're totally wrong about Nixon, but then so is everyone else. Thank you, Jay. Thank you very, very much.